record on this computer. There we are. So we're recording. So yeah, so we're making good progress on our course. We're in the fourth quarter, so to speak, now, right? We've covered quite a lot of ground already. And the last topic was S-shaped growth, right? And by its very nature, it's a nonlinear behavior. We had sort of touched a little bit about nonlinearity, but we really did a deeper dive onto nonlinear modeling and specifically table functions, which are, as I've said, the signature way of doing nonlinear relationships in system dynamics. Certainly not the only way, but kind of the way that's most well known, particularly if people know about system dynamics but don't really know how to do it. They'll say, "Oh, that's what those weird table function things," right? So, at any rate, we started looking at nonlinear models and S-shaped growth. So the next step in that journey is to say, all right, and this is kind of like the limits to growth, where you have the nice S shape, but wait a minute, what if it rolls over and goes down? Okay, now what? Okay, so overshoot and collapse. And we did look at that at the beginning of the course with the limits to growth, right? And to some degree with the urban dynamics stuff. So can we look at it with some other model that's maybe a little more modest? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to call up a flight simulator here. And hopefully, can everybody see that? Hopefully.
I don't see it yet.
Okay, so hang on. Let me let me try this now. Hang on. Okay, so how about now?
I see it now.
Okay, so adventures in ecological economics, the Kaibab Plateau Economics Flight Simulators. So I call my flight simulators economics flight simulators because I'm this Trending Cycles thing is going to be a online educational site for specifically for economics and system dynamics. But so this is a classic model and a classic exercise in system dynamics going back at least to the 1970s. Okay, and it's in the genre of S-shaped growth, overshoot and collapse, nonlinear modeling, but it's not a terribly large model. So it's kind of manageable, I guess you might say. So let's go to the table of contents. We have, so there's something about deer here, okay? Deer herds on the Kaibab Plateau. There's this guy, Edward Cormundy. And so I drew from his textbook. And then Aldo Leopold was actually a professor from the University of Wisconsin, and he documented the dynamics on the Kaibab Plateau. So he documented it, and Cormundy popularized it in his textbook. I'm not sure if it was an ecology textbook. I think that's what it was. All right, so we have some learning objectives here. So we want to explore the stock flow feedback loop structure of the Kaibab Plateau model. It's classic, as I mentioned, in system dynamics. It involves exponential growth, overshoot and collapse of a deer population in a finite world, in other words, a plateau. Okay, and so we want to gain familiarity with the model and of the tragedy or the issues on the Kaibab Plateau. We want to start looking again at how you use a system dynamics model for policy analysis specifically. We want to call attention to the fact that we kind of have a generic structure here for overshoot and collapse. Okay. And again, it's just another application of system dynamics. Okay, so what's the background information? Well, this is from Cormundy's book. I guess I was kind of going from memory. It is an ecology textbook. And he says, well, prior to 1907, the deer herd on the Kaibab Plateau, which is 727,000 acres on the north rim of the Grand Canyon, numbered about 4,000. In 1907, a bounty was placed on cougars, wolves, and coyotes, all natural predators of deer. So I guess the ranchers were upset that the predators were killing their sheep and cows and stuff like that. So they lobbied the state to be able to do that. Within 15 to 20 years, there was a substantial extirpation of these predators. So the hunters came in and wiped them all out, and a consequent and immediate eruption of the deer population. So unlike kind of Lac de Voltaire, where there's this oscillation, you got rid of the predators, so the prey, the deer, went through the roof. By 1918, the deer population had increased more than tenfold. The evident overbrowsing of the area brought the first of a series of warnings by competent investigators, none of which produced a much needed quick change in either the bounty policy or that dealing with deer removal. So like the movie Don't Look Up, we're warning, and they're not doing anything about it. In the absence of predation by its natural predators or by hunters, the herd reached 100,000 deer in 1924. In the absence of sufficient food, 60% of the herd died off in 2 successive winters. By then, the girdling of so much of the vegetation through browsing precluded recovery of the food reserve to such an extent that subsequent die-off and reduced mortality yield a population about half that which could theoretically have been previously maintained. Perhaps the most pertinent statement relative to the matter of the interregulatory effect of predator and prey is by Aldo Leopold. We found no record of a deer eruption in North America antedating the removal of deer predators. Those parts of the continent which still retain the native predators have reported no eruptions. This circumstantial evidence supports the surmise that removal of predators predisposes a deer herd to eruptive behavior. So you get rid of the predators and the deer herd explodes, but then you hit the carrying capacity. So in Cormundy's book, he presents this graph, okay? And so, of course, system dynamicists have seen this and said, we have a reference mode, a picture that kind of tells the story that I just described to you, or, Cormundy described to you, right? So you have clearly exponential growth, right? And you have the first damage seen, the first warning given around, 1918 or something. The first fawn starved, 7 successive warnings. You get a peak. The highest population ever is right before the collapsed. 60% of the herd starved in 2 winters. And the probable carrying capacity, if the herd was reduced in 1918, was around something like 30,000. And of course, it dropped as low as 10,000. Okay. So let's see, did I have, I'm just trying to I thought I had a map here of the Kaiblat Plateau, but I can't remember. I did this a while ago. All right. So then we go to structure causes behavior. Let's talk about the system structure here. Okay. So this is the model. Okay. Right out of the box, we see it's a second order system, right? There's 2 stocks. They're most likely independent of one another, right? One is deer and one is food. Okay. Now look over here. The predator population is a table function. Okay. So could you model the predators as a stock? In Lac de Voltaire, predator and prey were both stocks, right? So could you model it as a stock? Go ahead, Najla. Yeah.
You just said a minute ago that the deer population is probably independent of the food population. Could you explain or remind me of what you mean by that?
Independent in the sense that think of it as the initial value of the deer is independent of the initial value of the stock. You don't need the initial value of the deer to calculate the initial value of the food. So they're not interdependent on one another. Like the Bass diffusion model, you had the population, it was divided between non-adopters and adopters. So they were adopters and non-adopters was just, the one was population minus the other. So they were not independent of one another. So in this case, they are independent of one another.
But aren't they kind of dependent? Because when deer's population goes up, doesn't that?
That does, independent of one, it doesn't mean they don't interact. It means that to calculate, think of it as calculating the initial value. It's not like deer and food are in the same units of measurement, right? And it's like deer, like male deer and female deer, and then you had deer population, and the deer population minus the male deer is the female deer, or something like that. Then they would be dependent on one another. So it's a second
you.
order
Okay.
system, right?
So it's like definitional, really. Yeah. Dependent.
Yeah, I would say that's a way to think about it. Yeah. So it's almost always the case that the number of stocks is the order of the system, but every once in a while it's a little tricky where you get like that Bass diffusion model thing. Okay, so, but let's circle back. Speaking of stocks, notice that the predators are modeled as a table function rather than a stock, because kind of makes, if you're thinking about it, you know, like, shouldn't it be a stock? What do you think? Should we make it a stock? Could we make it a stock? I mean, we could. There's nobody stopping us. So the question is, should we?
Wait, are you saying the predator population?
Yeah, it's a table function. If you look over here,
Mhm.
see the little tilde there? That means it's a table function. Okay. So, and you'll see the table
Yeah,
function later.
I mean, it should be a stock if it interacts with well, if it yeah, it seems like it should be.
Yeah. So if you think about Lotka Volterra, the predators and the prey were both stocks, and they had births and deaths and all that, right? So you certainly could model the predator population with stocks and flows. Also, as you're going to see when we go along, the predators go away. And how do they go away?
They're overhunted.
They were hunted. So there could be a stock of hunters, right? And the hunters wouldn't be born and died, but they would be, you know, there'd be some sort of attractiveness of hunting on the plateau.
Or hunting licenses could be a stock.
Hunting licenses. There could be the word goes out among hunters, like you can get a deer or not. Like, don't go there. You don't get a deer, or it's very successful. If you go, you're likely to get a buck, an 8-point buck or something. Then deer hunters go, oh, you know. So, so the hunters could most probably be modeled as a stock as well. So, well, why aren't these variables modeled as a stock? Well, again, we're trying to model a problem, not the system, right? So we're trying to keep it simple as possible. So in this model, it's not necessary to generate the reference mode and what have you by making those concepts, those variable stocks, but you could. Now, one reason to go the extra mile and make the model more complicated and make the predator population a stock, and for that matter, have the hunters be a stock, and the hunters are hunting the predators, and then the predators are hunting the prey, is if somebody, let's say in the Department of Natural Resources, who was your client, wanted to see that in there. if they said, look, I feel that should be modeled that way, then you're going to go ahead and do it, even if you say, look, it's not necessary to understand this situation. So it really depends. There's no one theorem or something here that says it should be a stock or it shouldn't be a stock. So I'm just saying in this model, it isn't, but it could be. And the reason that it isn't in this case is because it's unnecessary to generate the reference mode and the insights. But depending on who the client is, you might be motivated to, if it's a hunting club, who's your client, they might want to see a lot of detail on the hunter sector, right? So it really just depends.
So in this example, the predator population is modeled in a table versus the year, right? So like based off of the year, that value changes.
Yeah, we'll show you it in a minute here, but yes.
So if you like, you can do that when it's in the past, but like if you're projecting the future, is it just like then it's just a guess? Like the year, the value of number of predators for that year?
Right. You'd have to, so this model doesn't go way forward, but you could make it, you could do that. And yeah, you could say, you'd run what if the predator population was this, what if it was that?
Okay.
So, where, because you're right, you don't know the future, right? You're just trying to redesign the airplane so it behaves well and its good behavior is robust.
Right.
So
Okay.
what if there was this or that? You could do that.
Yeah.
Sorry, I have a question. Could you remind me of why the predator population is exogenous? Oh, it's exogenous to the problem, right?
Right.
To the problem of the deer population collapsing.
Right. Exactly right.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
and this is not my model. So this is
I
a classic
see.
system dynamics model. So if I was presented with this problem without ever having seen this and, started with a blank canvas, I might have included the predators as I might have said, oh, like a Volterra, let's start there and then go from there. So I don't know what I would have done personally, but in this case, it was not.
But it makes sense that if you're going to start with two stocks for this problem, you start with food, because for certain that that's what caused the deer to die off.
Yes.
Yeah.
They starved. That's right. Right. So that would be part of this chain of logic, right? You're trying to say, what should I put inside my fence? We're not trying to model the system. We're trying to model a problem from a system. Okay. So what else do we see here? Well, so the deer, there's a deer net increase rate or a birth rate. I would have probably said net birth rate, again, it's not my model. And that's influenced through a table function by the food ratio, the normal food per deer and the actual food per deer. So remember, on a table function on the x-axis, we almost always have a ratio, right? In this case, it's, well, how much food per deer is there? And what is it normally when the herd has a full belly? And as the food per deer goes down below normal, it starts to impact the birth rate, and then it could actually cause deaths, right, when they're starving, right? So there's not a separate outflow for deer deaths, natural deer deaths. In other words, deer deaths not from hunting and not from predation. There's a net flow. Again, not my model. I might have modeled it, have the starvation thing as an outflow and just the birth rate as an inflow, but you don't have to do it that way. And the folks at MIT did it this way. So, but just making a note of that. So on the predation rate, the way the deer die from being eaten, the issue is deer density, or the input to the table function is deer density. So remember, again, x-axis, we want a ratio. So it would be, in this case, deer per acre, right? That's the density. So as the density goes down, the deer killed per predator is going to go down because the deer are harder to find, right? When they're everywhere, you know, you can just almost run into one. You can't help yourself. They're everywhere. But when they're scarce, they hide and it's harder to get them, right? So it's sort of a productivity measure, right? The deer killed per predator, and then the number of predators determine the death rate due to predation. And then up here we have some policy space. Excuse me, somebody's calling. Potential spam is calling. So there's some policy space in the model. Okay, now we don't necessarily put that in at the beginning, but in this case, since it's a flight simulator, it's in here. So one of the sets of policy changes involves harvesting, having a harvest policy. There's too many deer. How do you get rid of them? Okay, you either got to put the predators back and let the predators get them, or you've got to cull the herd with some kind of harvesting program. What do I say here? So, okay, there's this. I covered that. And then down here with food, right? It's funny, these things aren't moving. I don't know why that is. They should be moving. It's kind of funny. With food, the food regenerates and it's eaten. So there is a desired food consumption rate per deer, right? So each deer annually, if it's an annual model, a yearly model, each is going to eat so much food, right? And so the number of deer times their annual consumption rate determines how much food is eaten or goes away. But there's also a table function here that says, well, how much food is there relative to the maximum food? So down here is food max, and that's determined by the area of the plateau and the maximum food per acre. So if you think about it, except for, I was trying to think about it, I guess maybe Jack and the Beanstalk, where you plant the magic beans and the beanstalk grows to the, however high it grew, it went really high. Fee, fi, fo, fum and all that, to the clouds and all that. Nature doesn't allow that, right? As plants get bigger, they tend to, their weight tends to roll them over, and then it puts shade, and it does, so it sort of naturally limits itself. They don't grow naturally to infinity, right? So there's a maximum amount of a regeneration that can go on. So once food hits its max, you got everything you can possibly have on the plateau. But as the food is eaten down, again, relative to the max, so there's a ratio, how much food relative to the maximum amount of food, as that heads to zero, that ratio, it takes longer and longer for the food to regenerate, for the grass to grow back, because then the deer are eating it right down to the root, and they're eating everything, every leaf and whatever, right? And of course, as we said, as the food goes away, the consumption rate's going to go. So here, deer are pulling food out, but you need first order control that says, hey, when there's nothing to pull out, stop the deer from eating. We don't, negative food wouldn't make any sense here, right? So that's our first order control, right? Okay. So there's a lot of feedback loops going on here, right? I mean, it's a smaller model, but it's not, it's still kind of complicated. All right. So exploring the model behavior, there's a base run, and then we talk about policy space. Okay. And so I'm going to just take you through this. We're not going to read this, but you get in the simulators I build, you try and give people the base run, or get them to see the base run, and then to try simulation experiments done properly, so they know how to use the simulator scientifically. Okay, so we'll go to the cockpit now. Okay, so the first thing you want to do is get a base run. So that's pretty much leave everything alone and see if we can generate that overshoot and collapse behavior. Now here's that predator population that goes away with a table function. So we don't have a stock of hunters. We don't have a stock of predators. So we're going to leave that be right now. Okay. And we're going to run the model once. And we get the qualitative behavior on the plateau. So I should have put a button in here to go to the reference mode. I mean, we can kind of maneuver our way back there. I should have a link that, takes us back so you can compare. So this would be qualitatively the same. I don't have the ordered pairs for this, the actual data. This is all I have. I could, if I put in enough effort, probably either find the data or, kind of figure it out from here. It's possible, I guess. But the argument is that it's not necessary. It's a qualitative fit, if you will, to the data. It generates the same time shape over the same time frame, more or less. Okay, but you could say, I want it fit tightly to the actual data, and we could do that if we wanted. And notice the food is going away. That's your problem. It doesn't go completely to zero. There's always a few seeds somewhere that get overlooked by the deer, right? Okay. So now you get into policy analysis. So you want to run what if experiments, and you want to say with the goal of making that blue curve on the upper left not happen, right? Ideally, we would want the herd to grow to the carrying capacity of the plateau and stabilize, right? And again, the reference mode said that's around 30,000. It's kind of trending down. 30,000, 25,000, something like that would be the carrying capacity. Perhaps that's when the warning was seen. It would have looked like this, right? So something around there would be the goal, I guess. How would you determine that? You would be working with an ecologist, I guess, somebody who studies this stuff, and they would do some kind of survey, I guess, of the plateau and say, all right, the plateau could probably handle effectively this number of herd, or a number of deer, the size herd. All right. So anyway, again, we just run the model once there's our reference mode, and we want to make this blue thing not happen. We'd like it to be stabilized without this big, death thing happening over here. Okay. So what would one policy perhaps be that somebody could actually pull off? So here's another key. You don't want to just make something that's mathematically elegant. You want something that somebody who's really doing this for a living, like working for the state Department of Natural Resources or something, can they really pull it off? Okay. So one thing, this is kind of the duh thing. Here we have a table function where we're getting rid of the predators, and we're using a table function. Okay. Now, and you can go up here and say, I want to see the ordered pairs that are being graphed here. Now, one, I don't know, emperor has no clothes kind of policy would be, well, if the problem was caused by the predators going away, put them back, right? Now, then you'd have to say, this is big in system dynamics. How would you do that? Easy to say and easy to do mathematically, but could you really pull that off? Well, in principle, you could go to, I don't know, Wyoming, Montana, Colorado, get these have a heart traps, trap wolves and coyotes and whatever, and bring them to the plateau and release them, I guess, right? You could do that. And, they do animal relocation. That's been done in the past. So that's possible. Now, the model has no cost information in there. So I don't know how much that would cost, right? And there's going to be politics with that. Does the Montana state legislature or the Wyoming governor of Wyoming going to be happy that you're coming to their state and taking their animals? Maybe not, so but it would be like, is it possible? Could somebody really pull this off? Right. Is one question. But if the answer is yes, you say, let's reintroduce the predator. So in this case, we could use a table function to represent that policy. And this would be sort of a gradual reintroduction. Okay. Now you could play around with this to, different shapes here, but that would be representing, okay, let's begin to gradually put them back. It's probably not possible to just magically, suddenly they're all back. You could try that, but that would be kind of unrealistic. So let's give that a whirl. Let's see what happens. Not very good. Yeah, Nejla, go ahead.
This is just a Stella question. Do you have to save when you ran the model, the base run, do you have to save it somewhere?
You don't have to. You could.
Does it automatically save your previous runs, or how does that work?
Yes. So you could do, well, as we're gonna get there, we'll show you how to.
Okay. Sounds great. Thanks.
Yeah. So yes, you'd use a comparative graph and you'd name the runs and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So then you can say, well, but how did I know that was the proper, what if we reintroduce them more quickly? And again, you'd be asking along the way here, is this even possible to do? Right? So that's a bit of a different, instead of, this, it's this, right? So it's a more aggressive reintroduction. And no good. Now you could play around with this a bunch, right? So, one more time, what if we tried to reintroduce them a little earlier? Let's see now. Yeah, no good. So you can give it a whirl, but that doesn't seem to be very, if you played around enough with it, you could probably find something that would work. But now it's like, wow, you really had to play around with it. And how do you know? It's not a very detailed model. How do you know it's exactly that introduction? So it doesn't seem to be a very effective policy in this case anyway. Okay. Now, again, this is a classroom example. So if we were really doing this, working with ecologists and whatever, maybe it's a good policy. I don't know. But this is to give you a flavor of how you'd use a model for policy analysis. Okay. And you could, so can you pull, what does the model thing represent in the real world? And is it reasonable? And can somebody pull it off? Is the policy recommendation something that a real person in the system who can make decisions would understand and could pull off? Okay, that's a big idea here. All right, so that didn't seem to be all that effective. If we played with it some more, maybe we could find something that would work, but then that would seem to me to be rather fragile if a lot of different shapes don't work very well. But we found one, particularly with a simple model. So I probably wouldn't look there for a solution. But the problem is what? There's too many deer in a finite world. There's exponential growth in a finite world, right? So we were trying to get rid of the deer by reintroducing predators, and that wasn't very successful. So what else can we do? Well, we can get rid of excess deer by hunting and selling hunting permits and all that. So, okay. So how many hunting permits? How are you going to run this program? Right? Just saying we'll have a hunting. Well, yeah, but how are we going to do that? So one way to do it would be the simplest way. Let's turn this on, is to have a constant, harvest. So every year we're going to harvest 2,000 deer or 3,000 or whatever. The first try is 2,000. So let's see if that works. So let's just, every year you sell, well, if every hunter was successful, you'd sell 2,000 a year. But you'd have to keep track of how successful hunters are. Some hunters are very good and others are terrible. And there's probably some average skill, right? So you might need to harvest 2,000 deer. You might need to sell 3,000 permits or 2,500 or what. You'd have to have some idea of the productivity of the hunters, right? Okay, that's a little more complicated. We're not doing that here. So we're assuming every hunter is successful. Everybody who gets a permit is successful. So let's see if that works. Now, you got a little inflection point there, and we tried starting the policy in 1915. With the table function, where we drew the shape determined the time the policy started, right? So now we can specify here, and notice the harvest rate over here in 1915, it jumped up to 2,000, which is what we wanted to do. Maybe we should start it a little earlier. Same amount of harvesting, but in 1912. Oh, so look at this. We got negative deer here. I never saw this one before. Well, that's no good. What are we lacking here? And this is not my model.
There were no limits placed in the model.
So there's no first order control. There needs to be some first order control. It's interesting. I didn't know this. My defense is it's not my model. It was done at MIT. So this is MIT's model. So there's nothing left. There's no feedback up here. That's right. There's nothing that says when this is empty, stop harvesting. So I'll have to revise that and put that in there. I mean, that's why some of this stuff you use test inputs and whatever, you're trying to uncover that stuff. And I didn't know that one. So I learned something here. Okay. Maybe we should start it in 1912, but let's be a little less aggressive. Okay, that's, maybe, I don't know, 1912. What did I say? 1,000. 2,000 was too much. Let's make it 1,500. No, so zeroing in there, it gets a little fragile, so again, when I gotta say, you can do it, but you can nuke it. I'll put in some first order control, but no, and you're kind of zeroing in. It doesn't, with a simple model like this, it's not accurate enough. So it's like, yeah, that's a kind of a fragile way to go about your business. Not robust, hard to pull off. It's not hard to sell 2,000 permits or however many permits are necessary given the productivity of the hunters to call 2,000 deer or 1,500 or whatever. But it seems like it's really sensitive to that number. So later on, when we do Monte Carlo experiments and show you for sensitivity, that's not going to be good, where you get very different results. If you move that number a little bit, it's not very robust. See? Yeah, Nejla, go ahead.
Oh yeah, I just had another software question. So if I was wondering about like those buttons, if I was wondering about those buttons, what they meant, would I find that information like in that background information area of the model? Like say
So you mean the switch, what the switch means?
Yeah, exactly. The switch, like for
probably
instance,
not.
These policies, because I've tried to play around with some flight simulators and had no idea what the policies were and was wondering how.
Yeah, I can't remember what I said here, but there's supposed to be.
Okay, it's there. Yeah, it's under this model behavior.
So
okay,
there could be. I did this a while ago, so I don't remember exactly what I said here, but. And if the instructions are clear to me but not clear to anybody else, we need to know that and change that and make them more detailed or whatever, right? So I'm still trying to figure out what my style is for making a flight simulator. Actually, my latest versions don't look exactly like this. I've changed things a bit in how I approach it. And one of the things is I already have, I don't know, like 20 of them. And every time I get an insight saying, oh, I got a better way of doing this, and I want all my simulators to be consistent, because it's A, it's a better way of doing it. And B, I want all my stuff, when people take my classes, they're familiar with my simulators. They know where to go and stuff. Then I got to go back and revise everything. So it gets to be really like you make one, it could even be a mundane change, a color change or the shape of a button or whatever. And then you got to go back and redo 20 of them so they're all consistent. So it starts to get to be, I want to finally settle in on what my template is. So, I mean, you never really settle in forever, but at least stabilize my thinking.
But it's good to know the information's in there if I just look hard enough for it.
Yeah. And also, if it's not in there, people like me, the game designer, need to know that maybe it was clear to me, like, oh, there's no need to say anything about that. It's obvious, and it's not obvious to somebody else. So that needs to be tidied up if that's the case. All right. So my thinking as a system dynamics modeler at this point is reintroducing the predator population or having a constant harvest size may work, but it's fragile, that you got to kind of hone in and just get it just right, and then maybe it'll work out. Now, again, this is a sort of a toy model, so this is not the model. If I was hired by the state of Arizona to really do this, there'd be a lot more detail here and whatever. But under the assumption for a classroom exercise that it's a really good model for this thing, policies that require you to sneak up on, like, if I make it 1,500, I'm almost there. If I make it 1,300, no, that's no good. Maybe 1,350. When you're sneaking up on this, not very robust. Same thing with the shape of the table function and where you started turning the reintroduction up. If you say, like, I'm getting there, I can maybe zero in on it. In the real world, you're not going to pull it off. So I would steer away from those kinds of policies, suggestions from the model, even though you can get it to work mathematically. They're not robust. Okay, so how about, instead of a constant harvest size, a constant harvest percentage? Yeah, go ahead, Ashley.
Would there be a way to make it that robust if it was a larger model and it incorporated more things, or is that just not really something the system dynamics is a good tool for?
It is a good tool, and I will show you.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
It's a good question, though. Yeah, that, as you might deduce from me saying this, it's not robust, no good, not robust. I'm leading to something that is robust. A more complicated policy would be to say, well, the constant harvest size does not take the herd size into account. Whether it's big or small, you pull 2,000 or 1,500, and it even nuked it. We needed first order control there, right? So what if we said, all right, we got to take the size of the herd into account. So let's take a constant percent of the herd. Now, it's more complicated to pull off by the Department of Natural Resources because they have to estimate the size of the herd every year. Now, being from Wisconsin, I can tell you they do that. When I can vividly remember when I was a senior in high school, I was sitting in an advanced physics class and taking a test. And I was sort of in the front seat in the row right by the door. So like the door was open. And as you walk into the room, the first row, the first desk, that's where I was seated. And I was taking a test and I'm looking down, and out of the corner of my eye, peripheral vision, I was like, did a deer just run down the hallway? And the answer is yes. So what happened was there's so many deer in Wisconsin. This poor thing got confused and it smashed through, saw itself, its reflection or something, and it smashed through the glass door of the high school, and it was running through the hallways, frantic, trying to get out and afraid and everything. But it was so cut up and stuff, they called the police, they had to put it down. But yeah, there's so many deer in Wisconsin. And I mean, a very common thing to say in Wisconsin when somebody leaves your house, not if you're in Milwaukee, but if you are in a more rural area of the state, which is most of the state, they'll say, "Thanks for coming. Have a safe trip home. Watch for deer." They always say, "Watch for deer." And I've hit deer many times in Wisconsin, but always never flat on. I always sort of grazed them. They sort of bounced off the side of the car. But, you know, if you hit one square on, it's no good. It wrecks your car, can go through the windshield, kill you, whatever. My point is there's so many deer in Wisconsin. They have to cull the herd, and they know the size of the herd, not to the exact deer, but they have a pretty good idea. And other species, I know even in Massachusetts, they tag a lot of the bears and stuff, and they know exactly how many bears are pretty close to how many of certain species there are. So, but it requires more work. You've got to estimate the size of the herd, but now this policy would take that into account. So you're not just mindlessly taking out 2,000 deer or whatever the number is a year, irrespective of the size of the herd. So let's try, there's a constant percentage, 1%, starting in 1915. How's that working? No good. How about 5%? Oh, sorry. Let's put that back. I didn't turn it on. Got to remember to turn it on. Run the model. Yeah, no good. How about 5%? Turn it on. Now, so you see, we are getting over here on the right-hand side. There is something happening. It doesn't look like it on the left over here, but something is happening. How about 10%? Again, we're starting in 1915. Not really. I mean, we're getting a little inflection point here. How about, I don't know, 40%? Start going big or go home. Okay, that's too much. 30%, I don't know. No good. So now, we're having to sneak up on it, right? So I'm a little wary of policies when you got to sneak up on it. Okay, so see, between 20 and 25, something's happening in there, but you're having to sneak up on it. But maybe we should start it earlier. That's no good. We're going to start it earlier. A little inflection point there. So we'll start it earlier. I don't know what I say. 18%. So that's not enough. Now it's growing. Right. So starting it earlier. So let's start it later. I don't know. 1923. 10%. No. So you see, it's not really, if you look on the upper right here, where it's the policies are going into effect, but it's really not avoiding the sharp collapse. But again, if you fiddled enough with it, you could probably zero in on something that would work. It's not going to be robust. All right, what's our last choice here? Adding a negative feedback loop to the system. Okay, so we want our policy to involve the size of the herd. So we're not mindlessly taking out 2,000 deer a year when there's 2,100 deer left on the plateau or something, right? That's no good. So the policy should take into account the size of the herd, right? But it should be robust. You shouldn't have to sneak up on a precise value or precise shape of a table function, because this is a model. It's not real. It's an egregious oversimplification of reality. And the chance of you pulling off the exact number or shape in the real world is slim and none. Okay. So what if we added a negative feedback loop, a thermostat, a servo mechanism, and say we have a goal for the herd of 20,000 here. And let's see what happens. And it stabilizes things, of course, very nicely. It was the last, the last one. And it said the goal was, you know, between 25 and 30,000 on the plateau. Now you can play around with this. What if it was 30,000? So that's kind of interesting, right? So it's not a panacea in and of itself, right? But let's make it 25. But it's pretty robust under most circumstances. And even if you made it, you know, made it big, so it's not as bad of a collapse. It's certainly not as good, right? But it's a much smoother transition than the abrupt changes of the other policies. So what's the takeaway? So if you have a system where it is growing exponentially, or it could be declining, but let's say growing exponentially, and at some point that's going to be a problem, you want to either sever the positive loop or control it with a negative loop. Okay, so the redesign of the airplane is to add a negative loop. So what you have to do for the harvest policy is what? You're going to have to figure out the size of the herd. So up here, see, we use the deer. It has to for the second and third harvesting policies, you got to know the size of the herd. And actually, in the way this model is set up now, you know, the DNR knows exactly the size of the herd, but really it would be an estimate, a perception or something like that, right? And the adding the feedback loop says, here's what I want. Where's the goal? Switch. I don't know if you can see the goal negative loop. Oh, it's not obvious here, but there's a goal in here. And then there's so you have what you want, what you got. And if there's a gap, that number of permits must be sold, right? So it's not knowing the size of the herd and always 2% of that or 10% or whatever. It's what do I want? What do I got? And the gap between the two tells you how many permits to sell. Okay. So, and then of course the big question at the end is, are we beginning to tie these behaviors, these time shapes, to other systems? So we're seeing the same pattern, the same stock flow feedback loop structures, generically speaking, associated with the same behaviors in the world models, right? In the urban dynamics model or the urban 2 model. In, you know, cancer growth is exponential growth in a finite world, the body, 1 cell to 2 to 4 to 8, and you have the plateau is your body, right? In the world dynamics, it's population growth, pollution generation growing exponentially, resources being chewed up exponentially with the global system, right? Finite world, right? So, and so you know, what would be the sorts of things that you would look for or be aware of if something's growing exponentially? You know, there's got to be a carrying capacity, and we saw that with S-shaped growth. But with overshoot and collapse, you can erode the carrying capacity by exceeding it. So that is the difference between overshoot and collapse and S-shaped growth, is that if you exceed the carrying capacity, if the demands on the carrying capacity exceed the carrying capacity, if the amount of food necessary for the deer herd is greater than the food that's there, and specifically in this case, the deer start to overeat it. They chew it right down to the dirt, to the roots. and the stuff can't regenerate. You kill the carrying capacity. So that's the key. That gets you the collapse of the system. Okay. All right. So how is that so far? So uncovered something over there. It's funny that model has been around forever at MIT, and it's been revised several times, and nobody caught including me. I was just like reproducing it. Nobody caught the first order control that's needed there. Actually, there's an even more elaborate version of this model. Let me see if I can find the book real quickly here. You just bear with me 1 second. I have the book. The question is, can I find it fast? Hang on 1 second here. Let's see. Okay, so I was able to find it pretty quickly. So if you like this, so Andy Ford, well-known SD guy, he's retired now, but he has a book called this is like crazy.
It's because you have your background blur turned on.
Yeah, no, I know that, but sometimes it,
Yeah, I saw
sometimes
it
it
long
zeroes.
enough. It said modeling the environment.
Yeah, there. Oh, it was this there, man. Modeling the environment. There we are. So he has a more elaborate version of this thing in there. Let me see if I can quickly. Chapter 16. You know, he's got the guy Bob Plateau. Right? Let me see if I can see what he's done here. I haven't looked at this recently. I have to see what he's going on here. Got going on here, but real quick. Oh, he calls it biomass, not food. Yeah, just trying to see here but you know that some people really like this model, this exercise. And anyway, if you want more, this is a good place to look, is Andy's book. He's a super good SD modeler guy. All right. And he does it all in Stella. He used Stella. Okay, so that's in the S-shaped family, but you know, if exceeding the carrier capacity can rip it down, in this case, it made the regeneration time much, much, much longer, not infinite. You know, it eventually the stuff would grow back because the seed blows in from somewhere, or you know, whatever. They don't eat 100% of the food, but it takes really long time to regrow. So that is how you get the collapse. Okay. All right. How we doing? Everybody's okay with that? That's kind of more or less clear as mud. All right. So bear with me now. I'm just going to pull something up here. Hopefully. All right, so this is just clicking away here. Bear with me. I'm going to see if I can find it very quickly here. I have another simulator, but I want to show you this first, and we're not going to go right to the simulator. We're going to do this. Let's see.
Is that a kind of standard operating procedure that you would first try to do first try to use like the constant the way that the first two things that you tried were like, where you had like a constant, I guess it wasn't a feedback loop, but it was like a negative feedback rather than the goal seeking one. I'm wondering why was the goal seeking one the third thing that you tried in that simulator? Why is it the third thing?
Because it
instead of
was the grand finale.
I know, but I'm wondering about logical priority and what you know.
Oh,
what
so
that-
yeah, you mean, so now that you know,
Why didn't
the
you
secret-
immediately go, oh well, we need something with goal seeking in it, so let's do this.
because many people think about simpler things, like I just said, oh, just,
Mhm.
take 2,000 a year or 10% of the herd or whatever. They don't think about feedback loops or adding a servo mechanism, adding a thermostat.
Right. You mentioned it was like a servo mechanism.
Yeah, it's a thermostat, a cruise control on
It has a two-way
missile
it has a
guidance
two-way
system. So if the
communication.
system gets pushed off, so notice I was trying to emphasize how even though the table function policy restoring the predators or the first two harvest policies could probably work. You'd have to zero in on it and fiddle.
Yeah, I think the predator one, you didn't do it early enough, probably.
Yeah, and you can play around with the simulator. I'm not sure if did I give you guys a list of all the simulators?
Uh-huh.
Play with it and see. There's probably a table function that could get you there. There's probably
yeah, I mean, undoubtedly, because that if predators cause the problem, they should be able to fix it, right?
Which is the common, that's very common, not just with me, but the MIT folks say, yeah, that was always what people would say. Well, just put the predators back.
Yeah.
But the main idea there is not robust. As soon as you're having to zero in on something, oh, too much, oh, too little. It's a number between here and here.
Realistic. It's not always realistic either to just do the same thing that caused the problem. To undo, it's not always realistic to undo the.
That's right. So, like I was saying, you have to, okay, how are you going to restore them? You killed them, so you got to go find some other. You got to go to the zoo. You got to go to Wyoming and whatever, and they're going to let you do that.
And with some kind of animals, they may need to be trained. They may need to learn over generations how to be good hunters, for example.
Oh yeah, if they're domesticated in a zoo or something, on and on.
Right. That's what I mean.
Again, so again,
yeah,
we try in system dynamics to not just make a mathematically elegant solution, but like, can somebody actually pull this off in the real world that doesn't do system dynamics? Because most people don't, and they're like, yeah, you had some computer thing, tell me what to do. And then if like, well, the computer model says you have to call 1,453 deer.
Right.
Or between 1,300 and 1,400 deer.
Mm-hmm.
And otherwise it doesn't work. Wow.
Or introduce this exact number.
Yeah, or at this exact
wolves and hope they all know how to hunt deer, and that they don't, have a hard time surviving because they haven't been in that region for a few generations.
On and on. So the lesson of the model is that the best or a system dynamicist would often introduce a feedback loop into a system that's behaving improperly as a system redesigning the airplane. So if you want to stabilize something, you add a negative loop, right? So when we added a negative loop, it did overwhelmingly the best. It was a robust solution. So when you made the goal too high,
the other two ones, they were negative loops too, weren't they? Oh, but they weren't.
Well, there were no loops. That's why we needed the first order control. We crushed we had negative.
Right. Okay.
So, but the general principle is you might want to consider as a system dynamics modeler when you get to the policy stage of adding a feedback loop or loops to try and stabilize something or get a hold of something that's not behaving right. It's out of control. It's growing too much. It's shrinking too much. It's oscillating too much. and you want to stabilize it. So
Mhm.
you add a negative feedback loop, add a thermostat. Okay. In, the Strategic Petroleum Reserve tries to do that. It adds a buffer stock, right, to try and stabilize the system. So that's another kind of thing. It's related. Add a buffer stock. Sever a positive loop. That's another principle. Align goals of two parties that are pulling in opposite directions. Align their goals within their negative loops. These are all policy principles in system dynamics. And since people don't typically think this way, they rarely do this sort of thing.
Mhm.
Right? Okay. So, having said that, again, we share our screen here. And we're going to go to our dynamic syllabus here, right? And we're going to come down here to the heroin problem. So this is another classic system dynamics exercise. And this is an article from the Boston Globe. It appeared on April 22nd, 1976. So I was getting ready to graduate from high school when this came out. Graduated in 1976. Okay. So it's long ago, but a lot of these problems being described here are still with us. So Forrester, I think I might have said this before. Forrester always liked to paraphrase B.F. Skinner, the famous psychologist, the behavioral psychologist. And he famously noted that if the ancient Greeks were transported magically to the present day, they would understand absolutely nothing about our technology, but they would understand absolutely everything about our socioeconomic problems because they had the same stuff in ancient Greece. We haven't solved any of the socioeconomic problems. So there's policy resistance, right? We talked about that earlier in the course. All right. So we have a newspaper article here. And notice even the previous article from Cormundy's book, Cormundy's book was not a system dynamics book. It was an ecology book, right? It was not written. He didn't write his words that we quoted there for the purposes of a system dynamics model, right? In a similar vein, we have a newspaper article here that was written by Saul Friedman for the Night News Wire, and it appeared in the Boston Globe. This man was not writing this for a system dynamics exercise. In fact, for all I know, he has no idea that to this day, this one newspaper, he probably wrote a gazillion newspaper articles over his career, that this one article is used around the world in system dynamics classes. Okay, so my point is, it's a regular newspaper article. What does it say? Well, the next time you hear of a big drug bust and the seizure of large quantities of heroin, don't go believing that your city streets are necessarily any safer. In fact, a new study of heroin traffic in Detroit has concluded that the tighter the heroin market, the more likely you'll become a victim of a robbery or a burglary by an addict in need of a fix. The study, which is to be released in a week by the privately funded Drug Abuse Council, is in the hands of Detroit officials, but it has implications beyond Detroit. It supplies the first substantial statistical evidence challenging the conventional assumption that law enforcement campaigns to reduce the supplies of heroin will lead to a reduction of crime. On the contrary, the study found that drug seizures lead only to higher heroin prices, and higher heroin prices result in an increase in revenue-raising crimes such as robbery, burglary, and theft. The Detroit figures showed that crimes directly related to heroin climbed 3% citywide and much higher in poverty-stricken areas among whites as well as blacks when the price of heroin rose by 10%. If the price of a bag of street heroin increased from $7 to $9 any given month, the Drug Abuse Council said, the number of revenue-raising crimes, which occurred at the rate of about 11,000 a month, would increase to almost 12,000 a month because of heroin alone. Furthermore, reports of specific offenses increased when heroin prices increased 10%. Citywide, the greatest increase seemed to be in 3 crimes often associated with heroin use in Detroit: armed and unarmed robberies and burglaries of residents. Reports of armed robberies increased by 6.4% when heroin prices increased by 10%. Okay. Let's see. Focusing on the crime of residential burglary, the study team of statisticians and economists found that people living in poor neighborhoods were the most frequent victims of the addicts squeezed by higher heroin prices. The study was based on an analysis of heroin prices and crime rates in Detroit for a 40-month period from June 1970 through September 73. Drug prices were obtained from government narcotics agencies, and the crime stats came from the computers of the Detroit Police Department. The Drug Abuse Council acknowledged that any community that succeeds in eliminating or virtually eliminating its heroin supply could solve its heroin-related crime problem in fairly short order. But while no community has been able to do so, many police departments, including the one in Detroit, have made large seizures and have temporarily reduced the heroin supply. Although conventional wisdom holds that such efforts lead to a reduction in heroin-related crime, the study said, some people closer to the heroin scene, such as experienced law enforcement officials, believe the opposite occurs. In judgment, marginally successful efforts at reducing heroin supplies result in more, not fewer, heroin-related crimes. Okay, well, we get the idea. So Mr. Saul Friedman here has a very vivid description of this issue, right? There's some counterintuitive behavior here, at least at the time it was counterintuitive. When the police are successful in fighting the drug wars, right? They seize heroin. What's their reward? They get more heroin-related crime. Why? Because the addicts are poor, and so they can't afford the price going up from $7 a bag to $9 a bag, it said. So what do? They commit more armed and unarmed robberies and burglaries of residences. So they need money, right? And it usually happens in poorer communities. It says here somewhere in there, people living in poor neighborhoods are the most frequent victims of the addicts squeezed by higher heroin prices. So, you know, if you need to run, you're a poor addict, you can't afford the $7 to $9 increase. You got to commit some crimes to get the money. If you are robbing rich guys, you don't have to commit very many crimes. But if it's poor people, then you got to commit a lot of crimes to make enough money to buy the drugs, right? Okay, so that's kind of the problem. So it's, you know, the question is, when you read this, is there enough information to build a system dynamics model? And the real question is, what are you going to do about this? Is there a way to combat this problem here? There's actually quite a lot going on here, and this is going to be a very useful, I think, exercise when you're trying to build an original model based on, remember, we model problems from a systems perspective. We don't model systems. So you have a problem. Either you're given a problem by somebody else, or you have your own problem that you're working on for whatever reason, and you're trying to figure out what to do, right? So this exercise, I think, will be very good at beginning to get you thinking about how to go about your business when you want to build an original model of a particular problem. Okay? All right. So, questions so far, or is that kind of straightforward?
I think that makes sense.
Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of Mr. Kaibob. No, I don't want to save it. And then I'm going to go up. Up. I want to.
I would just add, according to our current drug policy, this is still counterintuitive news. Apparently.
Well, when you deal with anytime there's an illegal activity going on, drug use, guns, prostitution, any of this stuff, policymakers have to decide. They have limited resources, limited time, limited money, limited personnel, limited resources. You have to decide, where are you going to deploy your resources? Do you want to deploy on the supply side or the demand side, or both, in some combination? Where are the leverage points and what have you? Right? We talked about that a little bit before.
And the drug problems are so difficult because the incentive to do the drug once you're already addicted is so high. Like, policy wise, it's really hard to get after that problem, because on the other hand too, like we kind of saw with the opiate crisis, when there really wasn't regulation, or there weren't enough regulations, and then they were just able to get them from these kind of crooked doctors that would give them whatever they wanted, then it exploded as well. So it was like, if you're too hard on the law enforcement side, it gets worse on the violence perspective. But if you don't regulate at all, then now you have like whole communities addicted to opiates, and it's destroying the community that way. And
Right. So yeah. So these are nasty, gnarly problems, aren't they? Right. There's a whole lot going on with psychology, addiction, finances. It's really multidisciplinary, right?
But it's sort of similar to the Kaibab Plateau, where you can't undo what's causing the problem. I mean, I feel like it's sort of similar because I know I already read this one, and it's basically giving people access to treatment is the only thing that is effective at reducing the crime. And so you basically have to introduce that servo. I guess it's not exactly a servo mechanism, but it's just simply a negative intervention in the system.
Yeah, my opinion has always been that you need multiple policies at once. So you need the treatment that gets people treated for their existing addiction, but then you also need something that's going to simultaneously reduce supply, because then you don't want new people getting addicted. And so it's like, I think you almost need like multiple policies going in parallel to really affect it. But there's only so much money, and then they don't get funded usually together. So
yeah, all of that's spot on. And there are many problems like this. So all of the sort of the grand challenges, the wicked problems, world hunger, poverty, climate change, all these things are so multidisciplinary, so dynamic. Cause and effect are separated by time and space, making it hard to attach one to the other. There's all sorts of cognitive biases. It's just tough. And that's why Forster always quoted Skinner about the ancient Greeks, right? These problems are still with us. Okay, so how would we begin to build an original system dynamics model? What's the starting point? Everybody can see my screen. There's a blank canvas there, right?
I think you would start with crime, because that's the problem.
So you'd start with crime because crime is the problem. Okay, so what you're telling me is
the stock of crime.
We start with a problem.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the very first thing you do, or I do, when I do a system dynamics intervention of some sort, is I ask the people, assuming that I'm not my own client, where I'm just building a model for myself of something, some econ thing I'm wondering about or whatever. But if I'm helping others, the first thing I'll ask is, why am I here? Why do you need a system dynamicist? What is the problem, the issue, the curiosity? Why am I here? Now, you're not really my clients, but there's a newspaper article motivating our system dynamics intervention here. So based on the newspaper article, what is the problem? Now, you said crime, but it's a little more than, well, there's crime. What's the counterintuitive behavior, or like if you were to summarize the article in a sentence or two, what? It might even be in the headline. I'm trying to remember what that.
Drug arrests do not reduce crime.
So
It's not arrest, is it confiscations?
So right in the title, what does it say? When heroin supply is cut, crime rises. Okay. So presumably you want to get rid of the heroin, but you also want to get rid of the crime. But if you could do one, you get more of the other, right? Now, a lot of times with a system dynamics intervention, you don't know why you get the weird, we don't know why every time we hire people, our market share goes down. We're hiring more salespeople and our market share is going down, and you don't know why. In this case, the article tells us why, but it doesn't say what to do about it. So why, when heroin supply is cut, does crime rise?
Because the supply is reduced, which makes people more desperate, which leads to violence.
Okay, but more specifically, when the supply is cut, the police, knock,
Price.
knock.
The price goes up.
Price goes up.
Price.
All right, they seize it. So supply and demand, basic economics. You reduce supply of oranges or whatever, Tesla stock or whatever, same demand, less supply, price goes up. So the police succeed in, a no-knock warrant, knock, knock, like in the movies, they battering ram, and they have armed police, and they go in and they seize all the heroin. And what they do is raise the price of heroin. And then the addicts are poor. They just can't, it said $7 to $9 a bag. In the movies, it's always like kilos or something, or I guess, but a bag. So I don't know how much is in a bag, no idea, but a bag. And I guess I heard a dime bag in the movies, so I don't know what that means, but whatever that is, goes up from $7 to $9. Okay. And apparently the $2 increase, given the addict population, it's not rich addicts, it's poor addicts. You can't afford it, but they're addicted. So they have to get the money. Somehow they commit crimes, armed robberies, burglaries. Okay. And since they're robbing poor people, they got to commit a lot of them to make enough money to buy the heroin. So we know why. The article tells us why it's happening. The question is what to do about it, right? So the traditional system dynamics intervention starts with a problem statement, right? What do we do about the fact that when the police are successful in heroin supplies, the result is more crime. Or some such statement. Now, I've had consulting engagements where it took me about 11 seconds to find out what the problem statement was when I had a group of experts and stakeholders in the room. And I've had situations where it took 2 days to find out what the hell the problem is. Because you go into a room and you're not typically in the room with kids from the mailroom and they've been on the job for 5 days, right? You're typically in the room with people who know a lot about the system, right? They have great mental models. They've been doing it every day, all day for 25 years. So you're talking high-level managers, C-suite executives, these sorts of people. In the military, colonels, generals, whatever. And they know a lot. And they are in charge because they're good, or at least better than everybody else at what they do. More or less, that's why they're in charge. They might be the boss's nephew and they're in charge, but a lot of times they are pretty good. That's why they're in charge and you're not, or I'm not, right? So they know a lot and they're good, okay? And you've got to get them to tell you what is the problem. And like I say, sometimes everybody in the room knows what it is and they'll just tell you. It takes 5 seconds and you're off to the races. And other times, these people cannot agree because they're from different parts in the organization and they just have different perspectives on things. And then you get into power dynamics where you go take a bio break and somebody slides up to you and says quietly, I don't agree with Sally or John, the CEO or my boss or General so-and-so, but I can't say that in the meeting. So there's stuff like that goes on all the time. If you look very young in my experience in these situations, you could be the greatest modeler on planet Earth. And if you're in a room full of people who look like me, old dudes crusty old dudes have been doing something forever, and you look like you're 13 to them, even though you're 31 or whatever you are. I don't mean any of you, but I mean the generic person who's really technically savvy, but to them looks like a punk kid. It's really hard for that person to get information accurately from those folks. So often, you need a team of people to go in and somebody who looks like who would be George. You know who George Clooney is? Right now, I'm trying to think of somebody who has a stately appearance. They're older, but not super old, but they can kind of have a commanding presence in the room, and the other people with a commanding presence see them as kind of a peer, and they'll talk freely, and they can be challenged by that person and not be offended. Where if it looks like a teenager is challenging them, they get the hairs go up on the back of their neck, right? So somebody who's a really great modeler might not be the person to facilitate the room. Could be. I mean, to have everybody, you're a great modeler, you're a great game builder, you can facilitate, you can write well. To have one person be all those things is very rare. Or it takes time to develop all those skills and integrate them together. And so it's usually not somebody who's new to the game. These are practical considerations. I don't want to scare you or put you off, but just saying, when you're really doing this in a real organization, you're usually not doing it with low-level folks. And if you're at the highest levels, it's tricky business to try and get these folks to speak freely and tell you what the problem really is and, and whatever. Because otherwise, it's just a silly exercise in academic scribbling, But if you're really trying to change the system, so redesign the airplane so it works better, you need this level of person in the room. Not only do they know more, but they have the authority to change things, right? So you got to get them to tell you a problem statement. What is it might not be a problem, might just be a good thing, but they don't know why it's happening, or it's a curiosity. But there's some reason they feel they need a model to assist their thinking. Okay. And so why am I here? What is the problem? So, all right, we read this article. It's a sort of a faux consulting engagement. If Saul Friedman was our client, right? So we have this weird thing that's happening, at least was weird back then, when the police succeed in getting heroin off the streets. Good. We want them to do that, but then they get a whole nother series of problems. So what do you do about that? The answer is probably just don't seize heroin. Let the heroin roll, right? Okay, so what to do about it? All right, so we have a problem statement, something that is going to motivate our modeling study. Okay. This is important because we want it to, we're not trying to model the system. We're not trying to make a digital twin. We're trying to model a problem from a systems perspective. We're trying to simplify. We're trying to leave things out of our model, not put things in our model. John Sturman would always say, rookie modelers say, what can I put in my model? Veteran modelers say, what can I leave out of my model? So there's, again, a struggle, usually with high-level executives, I found, where they just want certain things in their model. And you say, that's not necessary. And they say, I don't care. I want that in my model. And I'm paying you. So I've had a few times where I'm like, I'd say to the client, like, look, you're paying me to do this, and I know a lot about how to do this. I'm telling you that is unnecessary, and it's going to be a lot of work for me, which you'll have to pay me for, and it's unnecessary. And the answer was, I don't care, get it done. I want it in there. I go, okay, So I said, just so I'm telling you, you don't have to do this, and it's going to cost more, but now you're telling me go ahead anyway. Okay. But it's very common. And usually when it's the person who's in charge of pencils in the organization, you're doing this with, they want a lot of the details of the pencil sector, because that's where they do their thing, right? So they want their thing to be a lot more detailed than is necessary. That's very common. Okay. So the problem statement tries to get you to focus on a limited amount of stuff that's going to be in our model. We're going to leave a lot out, hopefully. Okay. Yes, so far that's kind of okay. All right. So we're going to draw a fence here, a boundary, and inside is going to be the stuff that's going to be in our model, and outside is stuff that isn't going to be in our model. Now, how do we decide that? Well, there's no one right way of going about this. Different people do it different ways. Okay. I found that, so let me state it a different. Many people will try and do causal loop diagramming at this point and try and start finding important variables and linking them together with feedback links, eventually making loops, all related to this problem statement. I tend to not do that. I have done it. I've done it more than once, but that's usually not my first move. I'll do that if I find I'm not getting somewhere with my other way I prefer to operate. So it all just depends on the situation. Again, you got to be flexible. You got to pivot when you're trying to figure out who the clients are and how they tick and who's the big kahuna in the room. And is that person intimidating other people? And are you getting the truth? And I'll give you an example. I did a consulting engagement for a Native American tribe who was battling ExxonMobil. So ExxonMobil did aerial surveys of their reservation and all the acres and acres and acres around the reservation, and found that it was very, very rich in all sorts of very desirable raw materials, okay, rare earth minerals and stuff like that. And so they went and bought up all the land around the Indian reservation so they could mine it. And then they went to the tribe and said, we want to buy your land, and we're going to give you a giant sum of money because it's got all these minerals. And the Native Americans said, no way. This is our reservation. We've been here for hundreds, if not thousands of years. There are burial grounds here. There's a particular rice that was grown on the lake. It's in Mole Lake, Wisconsin, that is used in their ceremonies. They said there is no friggin' way we are going to sell you our land, number one. And number two, we fear that you mining the land around us will contaminate the groundwater and wreck Mole Lake and wreck the rice and whatever. So this generated a giant hoop-de-doo and court case and what have you. So I was brought in to do some systems. So what happened was ExxonMobil had done some. So when the tribe refused to sell, ExxonMobil said, we're going to do a study and then release it to the press that shows all the economic prosperity that will be unleashed if you let us mine, all the jobs that will be created, and the workers will eat at restaurants, so the restaurants will prosper, and so on and so forth. And so they asked me to read the report, comment on it, and then build an alternative system dynamics model. Okay. And so I did that. Fast forwarding to the end, we won and they stopped ExxonMobil. It wasn't just me. There were lawyers involved. It was a whole lot of stuff, but I had a little piece of it. But my point is, when I went up for my first consulting engagement with the tribe, we met in sort of the tribal headquarters, right? It looked like it was a modern, office building, conference room like anywhere else you'd see. And there was the tribal council there and the chief was there. And I said, we're going to be doing this, we're going to be doing that. And once we got a working model, we'll turn it into a game. And the guy freaked out. You think this is a game? And he's like reaming me, screaming at me. Finally, I said, no. And another guy leaped in and said, no. He doesn't mean that he's treating this. It's a simulation environment that we can use to test policies. And, well, it was clear who was running the meeting at that point, who the big kahuna was. And I had to be very careful with what I said to I had no idea going in there, because he didn't get stuff right away. It was, and he was like crazy right away, like 0 to crazy in 3 seconds. So that's what I mean about, you go into an engagement like this and you got to, and Ashley, you probably deal with military officers, it's the same thing. You got to figure out who's in charge and who's the crazy person, and, who's calm and who can speak freely and who's not being honest, and, or otherwise it's just an academic exercise. If it's not seen as legit by all the people after you leave, they're going to just throw it away or say, thank you very much. And they put it on the shelf and it gathers dust and nothing happens. Right. So, all right. So we're going to try and figure out what to put inside of our fence. You could do causal loop diagramming at this point. I tend not to, unless I got issues, and then I try something different. My first move now is to do a sector diagram. I'm not saying this is the way to do it. I'm saying it's a way to do it. And it's usually my first move after a problem statement. Oh, excuse me. I shouldn't say that. It's my move after we do a reference mode. I'm sorry. I should have done that. I got involved in my own story and I didn't think of that. So bear with me 1 second here. I need to get an eraser here. So before we do the sector diagram, we need to turn the problem statement into a reference mode. Right? So what is a reference mode? Let's refresh our memories. Can anybody tell me?
Is it to map the problem?
Yes, we want to make a dynamic picture of the problem, right? Called the reference mode. And what do we need the reference mode to do for us? Or what should the model do once we have at least a first cut of the model?
Just kind of give us an outline of the problem and the different factors.
Well, sure. So the base run of the model should do what? The base run of the model should look like the reference mode, right? Because when it does that, then if the reference mode is a picture of the problem to which the model is being devoted, and the base run of the model mimics the reference mode, then the model offers an explanation for why the problem is occurring, or what the question, whatever, right? Not the explanation, an explanation. And then you can use the model to run what if experiments aimed at redesigning the airplane so things fly better. So the plane flies better, the system behaves better. Okay, and you want it to behave better and be robust. Okay, so so if we were to translate this statement into a reference mode, how would we do that? That's, I guess, the next thing we need to do here.
You would put heroin seizures on one axis and crime rate, not the rate, I guess the number of crimes on the other.
Okay, so keep that in your hip pocket. Let me go back to now what I was starting to say before about sector diagrams. And it could also involve closed loop diagrams. What we want to do is find important variables related to the problem statement, the things that are going to be inside the fence. Okay, and the way I like to do that is to, my preferred way of doing it is to do the sector diagrams. That's where I was going with that. Okay, so what sectors might we put in the model? Any thoughts on that?
So would that just be like the crime level, the heroin supply?
So you might remember when I say a sector diagram, I showed you these things before. So this was Oxford Health. I think did I show you this? I thought I did, but maybe I didn't. There's a reference mode. Did I show you this stuff? Here's a sector diagram. Earlier on, I can't remember. I thought I did, but maybe I didn't. Maybe I'm assuming. So I didn't show you this?
I don't think so.
Or this one here?
I mean, we probably looked at something in the example that's similar.
Okay, so these are from models we've done in the past. So these would be sector diagrams. So think of it as you're in a conceptual helicopter flying over your model, hovering over your model, and you're looking down on the model, or you're in an airplane flying across the country and you're looking down and you see the parcels of land, of farmland that are laid out like a puzzle almost beneath you, right? So if you were hovering above your model looking down, what sectors would there be joined together to make this mosaic? So in this case, maybe I'm thinking I did this, but maybe I didn't do this. So let me tell you about these. Let's do this. We'll talk about these two sector diagrams, and then we'll leave it there because I'm looking at my clock. And then you can ruminate on it till next week. We'll pick up on it next week. Okay, so this first one I'm showing you here is from a project we did like 20 years ago. I did it with a guy from Yale University who was on sabbatical visiting with us. And we were looking at the zero emission vehicle industry. And at the time, they've done it again, but back then, this is like the year 2000, California had said, by like 2002, we want 2% of the vehicles sold in the state to be zero emission electric. By 2000, I'm going from memory, 3%. By 2010, 5% or something like that, whatever it was. And Massachusetts was thinking about doing the same thing. So we said, all right, under what circumstances would they be able to pull that off? And furthermore, going forward, under what circumstances would the zero emission vehicle industry dominate the economy, dominate the state economy? 90% of the vehicles are zero emission, 60%, whatever. Okay. So what we had here, we said, all right, we need a customer sector. Okay. This would be the kind of a BAS diffusion model. So you're in the market for a vehicle, and you can pick either a zero emission vehicle or a traditional internal combustion engine vehicle. Okay. And there's all sorts of variables that were in these sectors important, R&D, labor, pricing, what have you. Okay. Then the customer would make a purchase, and the vehicle, the mix of the vehicle fleet in the state would change. There'd be some percentage zero emission and some percentage internal combustion. Of course, these vehicles need infrastructure. You need either gas stations and repair stations or recharging stations. And the availability of infrastructure is going to influence the attractiveness of the various vehicles. Not the only thing. You know, delivery delay would be one thing. At the time, you had to wait for like 9 months to get a Prius. At the time, now it's Tesla, right? But back then it was a Prius, right? There was the issue of pollution. You're moving the pollution from the tailpipe to the smokestack because you have to generate electricity one way or another. So you're doing it from a power plant. So what were the total emissions, right? And then the utilities are going to have to get involved. If everybody's charging their car and doing the other stuff that they normally do, electricity demand is going to go way up, right? And that again is going to influence the attractiveness, the relative attractiveness, right? And then the government gets involved with subsidies and all that stuff, regulations and what have you. Okay, so this is what I mean by a sector diagram. We're above the model in our conceptual helicopter, looking down at the chunks of things that are related to one another. We'll call those sectors. Okay, and in a similar vein, we did a project some years ago with Oxford Healthcare. There's an HMO. We had a reference mode in here. So you can see membership, zoom, boom, overshoot and collapse. This is actual data and premiums earned. And the question is, well, why is this happening? And what could they have done to make it not happen? And so here's the structure of, so now we have kind of sectors and subsectors. We had the provider sector, that's the doctors, and we had the HMO sector supplying members, okay? And so what would happen is the physicians would provide services to the patients, right, treatments, and then they would bill the HMO, okay? And the HMO would attract members, do marketing and attract members, right? And then they would pay the doctors, reimburse the doctors. But the problem was they were undergoing a change in their IT system, converting it over, and it screwed everything up, and they started getting delays in the reimbursements and whatever, and the doctors started getting mad and leaving the healthcare plan. Okay, and that was causing the rollover. So, what could they have done to make it stop? You can see the base run mimicked. There's the membership, right? And there's the membership, right? And we ran what if experiments, getting better here. Some of them were no good, right? Some of it didn't matter or made it worse. And here it's avoiding the collapse. See? So again, we're in our conceptual helicopter floating above the model or the proposed model. And what would be the sectors, the chunks, the main globs of stuff that are related and then interact that we want in our model? And one thing that I find helpful is to not put on my my system dynamics hat, but to put on my economist hat, because I think supply and demand. So like if I was going to model a university, supply and demand, well, who are the suppliers? Well, the faculty, the administration, the campus, they're all part of the thing that supplies education. And who are the demanders? Undergrads, grads, parents, and what have you, right? And so the supply and demand interact. So here, supply and demand might help us in terms of sectors, right? Who would be the suppliers?
The drug dealers,
Drug dealers. And who would be the demanders?
the drug addicts.
The addicts, right? So you might say, and I know we're running out of time, we can, in terms of sectors, we might have the dealers and the addicts. And these two things are going to interact with one another. Who else is involved or might be involved?
The public safety sector,
Okay, so the police. And they're probably going to be
And also-
arresting.
maybe the government sector.
Okay, so government.
I mean, like maybe, yeah, policies or laws.
Okay, so the more
Because they
addicts
can
there are,
pass
the more
certain laws.
funding.
They might pass certain laws that make the police do more arrests and confiscations or whatever.
Okay. More seizures. Who else might be involved? Probably one more major.
Drug treatment providers.
Yeah, exactly. The treatment sector. So the addicts are gonna, and there might be some funding going here. And if they're successful, it's, that sort of thing. Okay, so there's probably, what do we have, like 5 sectors that leap to mind here, right? The biggies are going to be the suppliers and the demanders, the drug addicts and the drug suppliers, and the police are going to be involved in some fashion. Now you think the predators on the Kaiblat Plateau, we could have made that a whole sector, but we just made it exogenous. We might want to make it exogenous. When you hear seizures, what they don't do, as far as I know from watching TV, is call up the drug dealers and say, hey, tomorrow at 6, we're crashing through your door to seize your stuff. Don't be startled. We don't want to give you a heart attack. No, what do? They coordinate and they hit them all at once. Go, go, go. And bang, they go in. And it's shocking. It's a shock. Remember how we shocked the pieces of structure out of equilibrium, right? With test inputs. In other words, it's unexpected. And the drug dealers are sitting there like, oh, and they catch them, right? So shocks are exogenous, right? So if the police are doing the shocking, maybe the police will be exogenous in our model, right? Because we want to, just like the predators were exogenous or not. Let me leave you with this because we're out of time and I want you to chew on this until next week. So the police sector might be exogenous and we might be able to represent it with just an exogenous variable, very super simple. Like we represented the predator sector or predators, not even a sector really, in the Kaiblat Plateau model, right? But what if our client is the police chief and the captains and police captains and police lieutenants? We got 8 of them in a room with us. And we say, we're going to represent what you guys do with this one little variable that shocks the system. What do you think? And let's say they're paying you decent money. What's the most likely reaction of the chief of police?
If we just tell him that he should stop making drug busts.
Right, but in terms of the details of the model, if we say, look, look, I know you're paying me, we don't really need this as a sector. We're just going to have you shock the system, you guys. you're kind of unnecessary to this problem statement or having any detail of law enforcement. What do you think's going to happen? I mean, we don't know for sure, but in my experience, is that going to play in Peoria?
No.
Oh, are you kidding me? If the client is the police department, they're going to want to see a very sophisticated, in my experience, law enforcement sector, because they're going to be worried about how many officers do I put on drug busts? How many officers do I put on traffic control or whatever? The whole, shebang. What's my budget? I need budget from the mayor's office to, so it's unlikely, even if it's possible, like in the Kaibot Plateau model, to just represent that piece of it with a table function or something. If the client is in law enforcement, it is unlikely that they will go for that. And even if you win, even if you say, I'm the damn modeler, I know how to do this, and you kind of intimidate them on the modeling side of things, they're going to use your model when it's done, when you're done?
No.
Probably not. Right. So it would have been just an academic exercise, and you might have made a couple of bucks on the side or whatever, doing some consulting for them, but it's not, you're not going to change the system. You're not going to be effective, and you're probably not going to be hired again because you didn't do anything. Right. So,
so if your client was, say, like the mayor, then you might include more sectors, such as like government housing.
Yeah, right. Or political sentiment in favor or not of how's the mayor doing on the voters' minds with respect to crime. They ask, how's he
Or
doing?
like other things they can spend money on besides policing to solve this problem.
Yeah, so right. There could also be a budgetary allocation things in the mayor's office.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're the mayor hiring us to do this,
Mm-hmm.
there might be a different level of detail and different opinions as to what's important and should be in the model and not. What if you're hiring us to do this and you're the physician running the methadone clinic?
You might want different types of substitution, because I know they have different types of methadone. You might want maybe different standards and protocols around administering it.
So you're likely to have a very detailed treatment sector relative to if the police chief was paying you to do it.
Mm-hmm.
But those specifics, do they largely change the outcomes and the structure of the overall system, or is it just you're giving?
Well, so you still want it to mimic the reference mode, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of which is the problem statement. So as long as it does that, remember I said it offers an explanation, not the explanation. So you can have many different explanations for why something is happening, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there, it's not like it's 2 and 2 is 4. I know it's 4, and I'm trying to teach you how to add so that you get the right answer, which I already know what it is. When these engagements, you don't know what the answer is, and actually it just depends. There's no truth. What it is you got people with good mental models who are bad at mental simulation, which is all human beings. Or you've got a bunch of people who know a whole bunch collectively, and they need to reach a consensus and then have their collective mental model simulated mercilessly by a machine so that their thinking can be improved. So it adds clarity to the information they already know. That's what you're realistically trying. It's not like this is truth or the answer, right? It's okay if you're the mayor's office and the mayor's staff is there, they have their mental models and they've been in city government for a long time. They have a lot of information, numerical, written, and experience, and they're wondering what the heck to do, right? And you want to take what they know and make it explicit, get them to agree, right? That, yeah, this is how it works. And now start running scenarios, taking their collective mental model and making it better, revealing the dynamics of their own collective mental model, what represents lots of experience and knowledge and what have you. And they're going to use those mental models anyway, even if you're not there building them up, right? So you want to enhance what they know. Realistically, that's all we do. We're not finding truth. Finding E equals MC squared, the equation. We're not doing that. I wish we could, but we don't. Okay. So chew on this for next time. We're going to start next time by revisiting, we're going to know this and we're going to revisit this. Right. And we're going to say, all right, what do we want to do next? And we're going to be building this model. Okay. In real time, right here. And I'll try to convey my thinking as we're going through this. Like, what am I seeing? What am I thinking about? Realistically, what would happen if we really had real whatever's here, drug dealers, police officers, mayors, methadone clinic people, whatever, in my experience, for whatever it's worth, right? And the challenges you'll face. And if you're just doing this in a cubicle by yourself and sending it to a musty journal somewhere, then fine, make it mathematically elegant and all that, but it'll go on the shelf somewhere. Nobody will read it or nobody will care. The world will not change. To change things, you got to get to these people who can change things, work with them and convince them. Take what they know. It's their model. It's not your model. It's their model. It's in here in their heads. You just are revealing it to them. Right? So. Okay.
All right.
All right, good. Happy Thanksgiving. Travel safely. Ashley, good. Lots of luck.
Thank you.
Bring some podcasts or audiobooks or something, and we'll reconvene next Monday. Okay.
And listen to the old lectures of this class.
What greater?
My husband will love listening to that.
Yeah, what fun. All right, y'all. Thank you so much. We'll see you soon.
Bye.
Bye.